The morning fog rolled thick across Naval Amphibious Base Coronado, shrouding the San Diego skyline in gray. The Pacific Ocean churned restlessly beyond the compound's western edge, its cold spray mixing with the salt-heavy air that clung to everything: concrete, steel, skin. It was 0600 hours, and the base was already alive with movement. Boots hitting pavement in synchronized rhythm, helicopters warming up on distant pads, the sharp bark of commands cutting through the mist. Inside Building 47, home to Naval Special Warfare Command's elite SEAL teams, the atmosphere was different. Control chaos. Focus aggression. Men move with purpose through narrow hallways lined with tactical gear, their faces carved from stone and sun exposure. This wasn't a place for pleasantries or bureaucratic niceties. This was where warriors lived. Lieutenant Commander Jake Reaper Brennan stood in the briefing room on the second floor, arms crossed over his chest, eyes scanning the mission board mounted on the far wall. At 38, he was the operational leader of SEAL Team 7's Alpha Platoon, 16 months into his current command, with 3 combat deployments under his belt and a reputation that preceded him everywhere he went. Tall, broad-shouldered, with close-cropped dark hair beginning to silver the temples, Brennan had the kind of presence that demanded respect without asking for it. Behind him, his team filtered in one by one. Chief Petty Officer Marcus Hayes, the platoon chief, dropped into a chair near the front, coffee in hand. Petty Officer First Class Danny Ortiz leaned against the wall, scrolling through his phone. Others followed, 12 seasoned operators in total, men who'd seen combat in 4 different continents and could breach, clear, and extract a high-value target faster than most units could get authorization. Anyone know what this is about? Hayes asked, his Louisiana drawl unmistakable even in 3 words. Brennan shrugged. Joint exercise briefing. Some interagency coordination thing. Probably another PowerPoint warrior trying to explain how we should be doing our jobs. Ortiz snorted. Yeah, because nothing says tactical efficiency like a spreadsheet. Laughter rippled through the room, low and knowing. They'd all sat through enough mandatory briefings to fill a career, diversity training, cultural sensitivity seminars, risk assessment workshops. Most of it was noise. These men dealt in action, not theory. The door opened. Brennan glanced up, expecting to see Commander Walsh, their squadron CO, or maybe someone from Naval Intelligence with a classified briefing folder. Instead, a woman stepped inside. She was in her early 40s, medium height, with auburn hair pulled back into a simple bun. She wore navy blue slacks, a plain white blouse, and a lightweight gray jacket. No uniform, no visible insignia, no name tag. In one hand, she carried a slim gray briefcase. Her expression was neutral, calm, almost attached as she surveyed the room. For a moment, no one moved. Brennan's instinct was immediate. Civilian contractor. Maybe an analyst from Langley or a liaison from Homeland Security. Someone outside the operational chain who'd been tasked with observing the exercise. He'd seen dozens like her over the years, smart, capable, but fundamentally disconnected from the reality of what his men did. She walked to the front of the room without hesitation, set the briefcase on the table, and turned to face them. Her eyes swept across the assembled SEALs with the kind of measured assessment that might have been unsettling if Brennan wasn't so used to sizing people up himself. "Good morning," she said. Her voice was even professional, with a slight East Coast accent, Boston maybe, or Rhode Island. "Thank you for making time this morning." Brennan tilted his head slightly, a smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "We didn't really have a choice, ma'am. Orders came down yesterday." "Fair enough." Hayes shifted in his seat. "So, are you here to observe the exercise?" "Among other things." The vagueness of her answer hung in the air. Brennan exchanged a glance with Hayes, then looked back at her. Something about the way she stood, feet shoulder-width apart, weight evenly distributed, hands relaxed at her sides, suggested she wasn't entirely out of place here. But the lack of uniform was conspicuous. "Ma'am," Brennan said, his tone polite but edged with curiosity, "we weren't given much detail about who'll be joining us today. Are you from Warcom? Or maybe Sockham?" "Neither. Intelligence community?" In a manner of speaking. Ortiz let out a quiet chuckle from the back. "She's good. Doesn't give anything away." The woman's gaze shifted to Ortiz, and for just a second, something flickered in her expression. Not irritation, exactly, but sharpness that suggested she didn't miss much. Brennan straightened slightly, his smile widening just enough to carry a hint of challenge. He'd spent years navigating military bureaucracy, and he knew how to read people. This woman was playing a game, keeping her cards close. Fine, he could play it too. Look, ma'am, he said, his voice dropping into a more casual register. No disrespect, but we got an exercise kicking off in 2 hours. If you're here to evaluate our readiness or audit our procedures, that's fine. We got nothing to hide. But it'd help if we knew exactly what we're dealing with here. She regarded him quietly for a moment, her expression unreadable. You even have a rank? Brennan asked, the question slipping out with just enough levity to avoid sounding insubordinate. A few of the SEALs chuckled. The silence that followed was immediate. The woman didn't blink, didn't flinch, didn't smile. She simply held his gaze, and in that instant, the temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Rear Admiral, she said quietly. Classified division. The words landed like a flashbang in an enclosed space. Brennan's smile vanished. His posture stiffened. Around the room, chairs creaked as men sat up straighter. Ortiz's phone slipped from his hand and clattered onto the floor. Hayes's coffee cup froze halfway to his mouth. Rear Admiral. Not captain. Not commander. Admiral. And not just any admiral. Classified division. Brennan's mind raced. Rear Admiral was a 2-star rank, the kind of authority that commanded fleets, entire task forces. But classified division? That wasn't standard Navy nomenclature. That meant Black Ops. Deep cover. Operations so far off the books they didn't officially exist. She let the silence stretch, watching them process. Then, without breaking eye contact with Brennan, she opened the briefcase and pulled out a single manila folder. She set it on the table. My name is Rear Admiral Elizabeth Carver, she continued, her voice still calm but now carrying an unmistakable weight. I oversee operational security and mission readiness assessments for classified joint operations under JSOC and SOCOM. I report directly to the Chief of Naval Operations and, when necessary, to the National Security Council. Brennan felt his throat tighten. He'd heard whispers about officers like her, people who existed in the shadows of the military hierarchy, pulling strings and making decisions that never showed up in official records. But he'd never met one. I'm here, Admiral Carver said, because your team has been flagged for review. The words hit like a punch to the gut. Flagged, Hayes repeated, his drawl suddenly sharper. For what? Carver's gaze shifted to him. Conduct, decision-making, adherence to operational protocols, chain of command integrity. Brennan's jaw tightened. Admiral, with all due respect, my team has a spotless operational record. We've completed every mission assigned to us. I'm aware of your record, Lieutenant Commander, Carver interrupted smoothly. I've read every after-action report from the last 18 months. I know about Kandahar. I know about the hostage extraction in Somalia. I know about the op in Yemen that didn't make it into official channels. Brennan's blood ran cold. Yemen. That mission had been buried so deep he'd been told it would never see daylight. Carver leaned forward slightly, her eyes boring into his. You're good at what you do, Brennan. Your men are some of the best in the Navy. But being good isn't the same as being untouchable. And right now, there are questions, serious questions, about whether this team operates within acceptable parameters or if it's become a liability. The room was silent. No one moved. No one breathed. Brennan's mind was spinning. Flag for review. Liability. Those weren't words you heard unless someone upstairs was thinking about shutting you down. Admiral, he said carefully, if there's a complaint or an incident. There have been several, Carver said flatly, and I'm here to determine whether they're anomalies or symptoms of a deeper problem. She straightened, picking up the folder. For the next 72 hours, I'll be embedded with your team. I'll observe your exercise, review your procedures, and conduct individual interviews. At the end of that period, I'll submit my findings. And then, Brennan asked, Carver's expression didn't change. And then decisions will be made. The fog hadn't lifted by 0800, but the training exercise was already underway. SEAL Team 7's Alpha Platoon moved through the simulated urban warfare environment on the eastern edge of the base, a sprawling complex of buildings designed to mimic Middle Eastern architecture, complete with narrow alleyways, multi-story structures, and hidden corridors. The scenario was straightforward. Locate and extract a high-value target embedded within a hostile compound, neutralize enemy combatants, and exfiltrate without casualties. It was a drill they'd run dozens of times. But today, everything felt different. Brennan crouched behind a low concrete wall, his rifle raised, scanning the second-story windows of the target building. Sweat ran down his temples despite the cool morning air. His earpiece crackled with the steady rhythm of his team's communications, call signs, movements, sector clears. Everything sounded normal, professional, efficient, but he couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. And he was 50 meters to his left, standing on an elevated observation platform. Admiral Carver stood with her arms crossed, eyes fixed on the battlefield below. She wore a tactical vest over her civilian clothes now. No weapon, no helmet, just a vest marking her as an observer. Beside her stood Commander Walsh, the squadron CO, a wiry man in his 50s with silver hair and a perpetual scowl etched into his weathered face. The platform offered a perfect vantage point of the entire training area. From here, Carver could see everything. The positioning of Brennan's team as they approached the target building, the role players hidden in strategic locations waiting to spring their ambush, the extract point marked by orange smoke, grenades 200 meters to the east. It was like watching a chess match where she could see both sides of the board, while the players below only saw their next move. "Your boys are moving fast," Walsh muttered. Binoculars raised his eyes. There was a note of pride in his voice. These were his men, after all, part of his command. "Fast isn't always smart," Carver replied, her tone neutral, but her eyes tracking every movement below with the precision of someone who'd done this herself, who knew exactly what to look for. Walsh glanced at her, his expression guarded. "They've done this 100 times, Admiral. They know what they're doing. That's what concerns me." The response clearly caught Walsh off guard. He lowered his binoculars, turning to face her fully. "Ma'am." Carver didn't take her eyes off the exercise. Repetition breeds confidence. Confidence breeds assumptions. Assumptions get people killed. Your team moves like they expect to win, Commander. That's admirable, but it's also dangerous. Walsh opened his mouth to respond, then closed it. He'd been briefed the night before, called into a secure conference room at 2100 hours, and told in no uncertain terms that Admiral Carver's presence wasn't a courtesy visit. She had authority to recommend anything from additional training protocols to full operational suspension. She reported directly to the Chief of Naval Operations and had clearance that made Walsh's security level look like a library card. And Walsh, with 26 years in the Navy and enough political savvy to have survived 3 different command structures, knew better than to push back against someone with her kind of power. Still, these were his men, his responsibility. And watching someone from outside his chain of command scrutinize him with such obvious skepticism made his jaw tight. Down below, Brennan's voice cut through the comms, crisp and authoritative. "Breach, you're up. Ortiz, you're on point. Hayes, cover the rear. Execute on my mark." "Roger that," Ortiz responded, his voice carrying the same calm confidence that permeated the entire team. Carver watched as Ortiz moved into position beside the door, a breaching charge already in hand. The rest of the team stacked up behind him with the fluid precision of men who'd done this so many times they could execute it in their sleep. There was no hesitation, no wasted movement, just pure tactical efficiency. Brennan counted down silently. Carver could see his lips moving through binoculars, then gave the signal with a sharp hand gesture. The breaching charge detonated with a sharp crack that echoed across the training ground, blowing the door inward in a shower of splinters. Ortiz was through in an instant, his rifle sweeping left to right in a smooth arc. The rest of the team flowed in behind him like water through a broken dam. Smooth, synchronized, lethal. "Contact front," someone shouted over the comms. Inside the building, chaos erupted. Role players acting as enemy combatants opened fire with simunition rounds, paint-marking bullets that stung like hell but didn't kill. The distinctive pop-pop-pop of simulated gunfire filled the air, mixing with shouted commands and the thud of boots on concrete. The SEALs returned fire, their movements precise and economical. No wasted ammunition, no panic, just controlled aggression. 2 role players went down in the first 5 seconds, their vests lighting up to indicate they were dead. A third tried to take cover behind an overturned table, but caught a round to the shoulder. Within 90 seconds, the first floor was clear. Moving to second floor, Brennan reported, his breathing only slightly elevated despite the physical exertion and adrenaline. Carver watched through her high-power binoculars, her expression unreadable. She noted the speed, impressive, the aggression, calculated, the confidence, absolute, but she also noted the shortcuts. The corner near the stairwell that wasn't properly cleared before the team moved past it. The doorway that Ortiz passed without checking, trusting it was empty based on a tactical assessment, but not verifying. The momentary lapse in communication, when 2 operators moved simultaneously without coordination, creating a brief moment where they could have shot each other if the circumstances had been slightly different. Small things. Forgivable things in a training environment where the consequences were paint stains and bruised egos. But in real combat, small things got people killed. Stairwell clear, Hayes called out, his Louisiana drawl somehow still present even in the heat of simulated combat. Brennan moved up, rifle trained on the darkened corridor ahead. The second floor was designed to be more challenging. Tighter quarters, more rooms, more opportunities for ambush. The HVT, a role player wearing an orange vest to make him identifiable, was supposedly holed up in the third room on the left. Intelligence fake. For the exercise, indicated 2 armed guards inside and possible explosive traps. The team moved down the corridor in a tactical column, each man covering a different sector. They passed the first door, clear. The second door, clear. Then they reached the third. Brennan reached the door, pressed himself against the wall beside it, and signaled his team with a series of hand gestures. 2 men stacked up on the opposite side. Hayes positioned himself to provide cover fire if needed. Ortiz readied another breaching charge, smaller this time, designed for interior doors. Then Brennan gave the signal. The door blew inward. Simulated flashbangs went off, bright lights and loud bangs designed to disorient without causing actual harm. The team poured to the opening like a wave. The room exploded into simulated gunfire. Brennan dropped one target with 2 rounds to center mass. Ortiz took the second with a headshot, showing off a little, Carver thought. The HVT, hands zip-tied behind his back, cowered in the corner exactly as he'd been instructed to do. Target secured, Brennan announced, his voice carrying the satisfaction of a man who'd just completed exactly what he'd set out to do. Exfil in 60 seconds. They moved fast. Too fast, Carver thought, her frown deepening. Brennan's team practically sprinted down the stairs, 2 men dragging the HVT between them while the others provided security. They burst out into the open courtyard, and that's when Carver saw Brennan make his critical decision. The exfiltration route was a straight line to the designated extract point, 200 meters away across open ground. Standard doctrine would be to move with deliberate speed, using whatever cover was available, maintaining security at all times. But Brennan clearly assessed the situation and decided that speed was more important than caution. Double time to extract, he ordered. Move, move, move. The team broke into a run, the HVD stumbling between his handlers as they practically carried him across the exposed courtyard. Carver's jaw tightened. She knew what was coming. The exercise controllers had planned for this exact scenario. That's when the ambush hit. Role players emerged from hidden positions around the courtyard's perimeter, behind barrels and alcoves on rooftops. Simunition rounds snapped through the air with their characteristic whip-crack sound. One of Brennan's men, Petty Officer Second Class Tim Rodriguez, took a hit square in the chest. His vest lit up bright red, and a loud buzzer sounded, marking him as a casualty. "Man down!" someone shouted, the words carrying real urgency despite the simulated nature of the exercise. Brennan didn't hesitate. He pivoted mid-stride, raising his rifle and laying down covering fire toward the nearest threat. Brass casings, simunition blanks, ejected from his weapon as he fired in controlled bursts. Hayes, get Rodriguez. Everyone else, suppressive fire. Hayes broke from his position, sprinting toward Rodriguez while rounds snapped past his head. He grabbed the wounded man under the arms and began dragging him backward toward a low concrete barrier. The rest of the team formed a defensive perimeter, returning fire in controlled bursts, their training overriding any panic or confusion. It was textbook, aggressive, effective, and executed with the kind of muscle memory that came from years of training and real-world combat experience. Within 30 seconds, they'd established a defensive position, suppressed the ambush, and were preparing to continue their exfiltration with casualty. The exercise controllers, watching from their own observation point, called the end of the scenario. Ceasefire. Ceasefire. Exercise complete. The gunfire stopped. The role players emerged from their hiding spots, pulling off their protective gear and chatting among themselves. Brennan's team remained in position for a moment longer, then gradually stood down, the adrenaline slowly bleeding out of their systems. But Carver saw something else, something that Commander Walsh, with all his experience and pride in his men, had missed. Brennan had made a call. Prioritize speed over caution, accept the risk of exposure to maintain momentum. In this scenario, it had worked. Rodriguez was wounded, not dead, and the team had successfully extracted both him and the HVD. Mission accomplished. But in a real-world operation, that decision could have cost lives. The ambush could have been heavier, the enemy more numerous, the casualties catastrophic. Brennan had rolled the dice and won. But the question was, how many times could he keep rolling before his luck ran out? Carver lowered her binoculars, her expression thoughtful and troubled. What do you think? Walsh asked, unable to keep the defensive edge out of his voice. Carver was quiet for a long moment, watching as Brennan's team began gathering their gear and preparing to head back for debrief. I think, she said slowly, choosing her words carefully, they're very good at winning. The question is whether they understand the cost. Walsh frowned. They completed the mission, Admiral, extracted the HVT with minimal casualties under fire. That's the objective. In a training exercise, yes, Carver replied, but training exercises are designed to be winnable. Real operations aren't. And the habits you build in training become the instinct you rely on in combat. She turned to face Walsh directly. Your team is confident, Commander. Maybe too confident. They move like they expect to succeed. That's admirable. But it also means they might not be prepared for what happens when everything goes wrong. The debrief took place in the same briefing room where Carver had first revealed her rank. The SEALs filed in, still sweating from the exercise, their faces flushed with adrenaline and satisfaction. They'd completed the objective, extracted the HVD. Minimal casualties. Rodriguez was ribbing the guys about getting shot, turning his death into a joke, and the mood was light, almost celebratory. By their standards, it was a success. Brennan stood at the front of the room, arms crossed over his chest, waiting for Walsh to start the debrief. This was standard protocol. Run the exercise, gather for immediate feedback, identify lessons learned, and move forward. He expected Walsh to praise the team's performance, maybe note a few minor areas for improvement, and dismiss them for the day. But it was Carver who spoke first. Lieutenant Commander Brennan, she said, her voice cutting to the low hum of conversation like a knife. The room immediately went quiet, all eyes turning to her. Brennan blinked, caught off guard. Ma'am, walk me through your decision to sprint the exfil route. The question hung in the air. It wasn't accusatory exactly, but there was something in her tone that suggested criticism was coming. Brennan straightened, a professional demeanor snapping into place. Speed was our advantage, Admiral. The longer we stayed in the kill zone, the higher the risk of additional contact. We needed to close distance fast and get to the extract point before the enemy could reposition or bring in reinforcements. And Rodriguez? He took a hit. We adapted. Hayes secured him. We established a defensive perimeter, and we completed extraction. Carver nodded slowly, her expression neutral. Did you consider slowing down? using smoke grenades to obscure your movement, establishing a stronger defensive perimeter before moving across open ground. Brennan's jaw tightened slightly. He could feel his team watching, waiting to see how he'd respond. With respect, Admiral, those options would have increased our exposure time. Smoke takes seconds to deploy and doesn't guarantee concealment against a prepared enemy. A stronger defensive perimeter would have meant staying in the kill zone longer. In a real op, hesitation kills more people than aggression. So does recklessness. The word hung in the air like a grenade with the pin pulled. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Brennan's eyes narrowed. Admiral, we completed the mission. 0 actual casualties. HVT secured. Team intact. That's the definition of success. Carver stood slowly, her movements deliberate. She walked toward the front of the room, her footsteps echoing in the sudden silence. When she stopped, she was directly in front of Brennan, close enough that he could see the flecks of gray in her eyes. In a training exercise, yes, she said quietly, her voice carrying to every corner of the room. But real operations don't come with safety officers and simunition. Real operations have consequences, permanent consequences. She let that sink in for a moment, then continued. You made a calculated risk, Lieutenant Commander, and today it paid off. Rodriguez is standing over there making jokes instead of lying in a body bag. The HVT is secured. Mission accomplished. But here's my question. How many times can you roll the dice before you lose? Brennan said nothing, his jaw clenched tight. Carver turned to address the entire room. You're all exceptional operators. I won't dispute that. I've read your files, reviewed your operational history, and watched you work. You're some of the best in the world at what you do. But exceptionalism breeds confidence, and unchecked confidence breeds complacency. The line between aggressive and reckless is thinner than you think. And once you cross it, people die. Hayes spoke up from his seat, his Louisiana drawl carrying a note of defensiveness. Admiral, with respect, we've been doing this a long time. We know the risks. We've lived through them. Do you? Carver asked, her gaze shifting to Hayes. Because from where I stand, it looks like you've forgotten what it means to fail. You've had success after success, mission after mission, and you've started to believe that's the norm. But it's not. Success is the exception. Failure is always one bad decision away. The words were sharp, deliberate. The room went silent. The earlier levity completely evaporated. Carver picked up her briefcase from the table where she'd set it earlier. Individual interviews begin at 1,400 hours. You'll each meet with me privately. Come prepared to discuss your operational philosophy, your decision-making processes, and your understanding of acceptable risk. She paused, her eyes scanning the room one more time. Dismissed. She walked out without waiting for a response, the door closing behind her with a soft click that somehow sounded louder than a slam. Brennan stood frozen at the front of the room, his fists clenched at his sides. Around him, his team exchanged uncertain glances. The confidence that had filled the room minutes ago had evaporated, replaced by confusion and a growing sense of unease. No one spoke. The silence stretched, heavy and uncomfortable. Finally, Hayes broke it, his voice low. What the hell just happened? Brennan exhaled slowly, forcing himself to unclench his fists. His mind was racing, replaying the conversation, analyzing Carver's words and tone. We just got put on trial. Ortiz leaned forward in his chair. For what? We aced that exercise. Apparently that's the problem, Rodriguez muttered. Brennan turned to face his team, seeing the confusion and frustration on their faces. They were good men, every one of them. They'd bled together, fought together, trusted each other with their lives. And now someone from outside their world was questioning everything they'd built. Listen up, Brennan said, his voice carrying command authority, even though he felt anything but certain. I don't know what Admiral Carver's agenda is, but we're going to treat this like any other evaluation. Be professional. Be honest. Answer her questions. And remember, we've got nothing to hide. Our record speaks for itself. Hayes nodded slowly. And if she recommends disciplinary action, then we deal with it, Brennan said. But until then, we stay focused. We've got another exercise tomorrow, and I expect everyone at their best. Understood. A chorus of yes, sir, echoed through the room, but the usual energy was missing. As the team filed out, heading toward the armory to clean their weapons and store their gear, Brennan remained behind. He stood at the window, looking out over the base, trying to process what had just happened. Commander Walsh appeared beside him, his expression troubled. "She's not wrong, you know." Brennan glanced at him. "Sir, about the risk," Walsh said quietly. "I've been watching your team for 2 years, Brennan. You're the best I've got, but you're also the most aggressive. And sometimes I wonder if you've forgotten that training exercises are designed to be survivable. Real combat isn't. With respect, sir, I've been in real combat. I know the difference." "Do you?" Walsh asked, echoing Carver's earlier question. "Because I've seen this before. Teams that get so good, so confident, that they start taking risks they shouldn't. It works until it doesn't. And when it doesn't, good men die." He clapped Brennan on the shoulder. "Whatever Admiral Carver finds in her review, take it seriously. She didn't get to where she is by playing politics. She knows what she's talking about." Walsh left, leaving Brennan alone with his thoughts. Outside, the fog was finally starting to lift, revealing the bright California sun. But somehow, the day felt darker than when it started. The afternoon sun broke through the fog, casting harsh shadows across the base. Inside Building 47, Admiral Carver had commandeered a small office on the 3rd floor. Bare walls, a single desk, 2 chairs, and a window overlooking the training grounds. It was functional, anonymous, perfect for conducting the kind of conversations that never made it into official records. She'd spent the lunch hour reviewing her notes from the morning exercise, cross-referencing them with the operational files she brought from Washington. The folder on Brennan was thick. 15 years of service compressed into incident reports, commendations, psychological evaluations, and classified mission summaries. On paper, he was exceptional, a model officer, the kind of leader the Navy wanted to replicate. But paper didn't tell the whole story. Carver had learned long ago that the most important truths lived in the spaces between official records, in the pauses during debriefs, in the way men looked at each other when they thought no one was watching, in the things they didn't say as much as what they did. And this morning, she'd seen something in Brennan and his team that concerned her deeply. Absolute confidence bordering on arrogance, a belief that their methods were infallible, and a dangerous comfort with risk. She'd seen it before, in other teams, in herself, once upon a time. It never ended well. At 1,400 hours exactly, a sharp knock echoed through the small office. Carver glanced at her watch, punctual, then called out, "Come in." Chief Petty Officer Marcus Hayes stepped inside, closing the door behind him with deliberate care. He was a big man, 6'2" and built like a linebacker, with dark skin, close-cropped hair, and intelligent brown eyes that took in everything without seeming to. At 34, he was a platoon chief, the senior enlisted operator who served as the bridge between Brennan's command authority and the enlisted men who executed his orders. Carver had read his file too. 12 years in the Navy, 9 with the teams. Grew up in rural Louisiana. Joined straight out of high school. Worked his way up through sheer competence and reliability. Married 2 kids. His performance reviews were spotless. His loyalty to Brennan evident in every line. "Have a seat, Chief," Carver said, gesturing to the chair across from her. Hayes sat, his posture relaxed, but his eyes wary. He folded his hands in his lap, waiting. He'd been through enough interrogations, friendly and otherwise, to know when someone was fishing. The trick was to give them nothing to catch. Carver activated the digital recorder on the desk, the tiny red light blinking to life. "This isn't an interrogation," she said, as if reading his mind. "It's a conversation. I want to understand how this team operates, how decisions are made, and whether there are any concerns I should be aware of. Everything said in this room stays between us unless you give me permission otherwise." "Understood." "Yes, ma'am," Hayes replied, his Louisiana drawl softening the formality. "How long have you been with Alpha Platoon?" 3 years, ma'am. Joined when Lieutenant Commander Brennan took command. And before that, SEAL Team 5, Bravo Platoon. 2 deployments to Iraq, 1 to Afghanistan. Carver made a note on her tablet. What made you transfer to Team 7? Hayes shifted slightly. Opportunity to work with one of the best. Brennan's reputation preceded him. I wanted to be part of a team that was going places. And has it lived up to expectations? Exceeded them, ma'am. Carver looked up from her tablet, studying his face. Tell me about Lieutenant Commander Brennan's leadership style. Hayes considered the question carefully. He leads from the front. Doesn't ask anything of us he wouldn't do himself. He's tactical, smart, thinks 3 steps ahead. He trusts us to do our jobs, and we trust him to make the right calls. Always the right calls. Hayes hesitated for just a fraction of a second. Barely noticeable, but Carver caught it. Nobody's perfect, Admiral, but Brennan comes damn close. Give me an example of the time he made a difficult decision. Hayes leaned back, his eyes distant as he accessed memory. Helmand Province, 2023. We were extracting a high-value target from a compound when we got ambushed on the way out. IED took out our lead vehicle, wounded 3 guys. We were pinned down, taking fire from multiple positions. Standard protocol would have been to call for air support and hunker down until extraction. But Brennan didn't do that. No, ma'am. He assessed the situation, realized we'd be sitting ducks if we waited, and made the call to push forward. We fought our way through 2 enemy positions, carried our wounded, and made it to secondary extract under our own power. Everyone came home. Carver made another note. Sounds like a success. But it was also a significant risk. What if it hadn't worked? Hayes' jaw tightened slightly. Then we'd have adapted. That's what we do. Ma'am, if you're looking for complaints, you won't find any, Hayes said, his voice firm. Brennan's a solid leader. Best I've worked with. I'm sure he is, Carver replied, setting down her tablet. But I'm not asking about competence. I'm asking about judgment. Hayes frowned. Meaning there's a difference between being good at your job and making the right call. Take this morning's exercise. Brennan chose speed over caution. It worked, but was it the right decision? Hayes leaned back, considering. His fingers drummed once against his thigh. A tell. Carver noted that suggested he was uncomfortable with the question. In combat, there's no such thing as a perfect decision, Admiral. You make the best call you can with the information you have. Brennan's been doing that for years, and it's kept us alive. Has it? Carver asked quietly. Or have you just been lucky? Hayes' expression hardened. Luck doesn't explain 3 deployments without a Kia. No. Carver agreed, her tone deliberately neutral. But it doesn't explain Yemen either. The room went cold. The change was instantaneous. Hayes' relaxed posture stiffened, his hands clenching slightly. His eyes, which had been open and conversational, shuddered like blast doors slamming closed. For a long moment, he said nothing, just stared at her with an intensity that might have been intimidating if Carver hadn't faced down men far more dangerous than him. What about Yemen? Hayes asked, his voice carefully controlled. Carver opened the folder on her desk, the one she'd been saving for this moment, and pulled out a single page. It was heavily redacted, black lines obscuring names, locations, and specific operational details, but still legible enough to make Hayes' stomach drop. Operation Sandstorm. Carver read aloud, her voice taking on the clinical tone of someone reciting facts from an official report. Classified Joint Action, August 2023. Objective: eliminate a high-value target embedded in a civilian area. Executed by SEAL Team 7, Alpha Platoon, under Lieutenant Commander Brennan's command. She looked up, her eyes locking onto Hayes'. The mission was successful. The target was neutralized, but 12 civilians were killed in the process. 12. Hayes didn't respond. His jaw was clenched so tight Carver could see the muscle jumping beneath his skin. The after-action report, Carver continued, pulling out a second page covered in dense text, attributes the civilian casualties to enemy combatants using human shields and unpredictable resistance. It states that all efforts were made to minimize collateral damage, that the rules of engagement were followed to the letter, and that the deaths were unavoidable given the operational constraints. She set the page down carefully. but there are inconsistencies. Witness statements from local sources that don't align with the official narrative. Forensic evidence suggesting the assault was more aggressive than necessary. Questions about whether alternative approaches were adequately considered before committing to a direct assault. That's bullshit, Hayes said flatly, his Louisiana drawl sharpening into something harder. We followed Arwe. We gave warnings. We used precision fire. We didn't have a choice. The HVD was about to slip the net, and if we'd waited, he would have disappeared into the city. We did everything by the book. Maybe, Carver said, her tone maddeningly calm. But the fact remains, 12 people died who shouldn't have. 12 people who woke up that morning not knowing it would be their last day on Earth. And someone upstairs, someone with a lot of stars on their collar, wants to know if that was truly unavoidable or if it was a result of a team that's become too comfortable taking risks. Hayes clenched his jaw, his hands gripping the armrest of his chair. You weren't there, Admiral. You didn't see what we saw. You didn't have to make the call in real time with incomplete intel and a clock ticking down. It's easy to sit in an office months later and pick apart decisions made in seconds. You're right. I wasn't, Carver said, and for the first time, there was a hint of something softer in her voice. Not sympathy, exactly, but understanding. But I'm here now, and I need to know. If you were in Brennan's position again, facing the same situation with the same constraints, would you make the same call? Hayes hesitated. The question hung in the air between them, heavy and unavoidable. Carver watched him closely, noting the way his eyes flickered to the window, then back to her, the way his breathing had quickened slightly, the internal struggle playing out across his face. For a long moment, he said nothing. Finally, he spoke, his voice low and rough. Yeah, I would. Carver nodded slowly, her expression unreadable. Thank you for your honesty, Chief. That's all for now. Hayes stood, his movement stiff. He paused at the door, his hand on the handle, then turned back. Ma'am, for what it's worth, none of us sleep easy about Yemen. Not Brennan, not me, not any of the guys. We know what it cost. But we also know that if we hadn't acted, that HVD would have gone on to kill dozens more. Sometimes there are no good choices, just bad ones and worse ones. Carver met his eyes. I believe you, Chief, but good intentions don't absolve us of responsibility for the consequences of our actions. Hayes held her gaze for another moment, then nodded once and left, the door closing softly behind him. Carver sat alone in the silence, staring at the folder in front of her. She made a note on her tablet. Chief Hayes, loyal, competent, defensive Yemen, acknowledges emotional weight, but rationalizes outcome. No regret about tactical decision. The interviews continued throughout the afternoon. Petty Officer First Class Danny Ortiz came next. The breacher, the one who'd blown the door during the morning exercise. He was younger than Hayes, late 20s, with a wiry build of a distance runner and restless energy that made him seem like he was always moving even when sitting still. He was also more evasive, deflecting questions about Yemen with dark humor and redirecting the conversation to recent successful missions. Look, Admiral, Ortiz said at one point, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees, I know what you're doing. You're trying to figure out if we're cowboys, if we're reckless, if Brennan's some kind of loose cannon. But the truth is, we're just good at our jobs. Really good. And sometimes being really good means taking calculated risks that other teams wouldn't take. And Yemen, Carver pressed. Ortiz's cocky demeanor faltered for just a second. Yemen was fucked up. I'm not going to lie to you. I see those faces sometimes when I close my eyes. But you know what I see more often? The faces of the guys that HVD would have killed if we hadn't stopped him. You can't measure the lives we saved against the lives we couldn't save and call a fair equation. War doesn't work like that. Petty Officer Second Class Tim Rodriguez was next, the one who'd been killed in the morning ambush. He was quieter than the others, more thoughtful, with a kind of calm demeanor that suggested nothing rattled him. When Carver asked about Brennan's leadership, he spoke carefully, choosing each word with precision. Lieutenant Commander Brennan makes hard calls, Rodriguez said, but he makes them for the right reasons. He's not glory hunting. He's not trying to pad his record. He's trying to complete the mission and bring us home. Sometimes those goals conflict, and when they do, he chooses us. Every time. Even in Yemen? Rodriguez was quiet for a long moment. Even in Yemen, we all knew the risks going in. We all agreed with the plan. If it went sideways, it's on all of us, not just him. By the time the sun began its descent toward the Pacific horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, Carver had interviewed all 12 members of Alpha Platoon. The pattern was consistent. Unwavering loyalty to Brennan, confidence in their methods, and a collective refusal to second-guess decisions made in the heat of combat. It was admirable in a way, the kind of unit cohesion every commander dreamed of building. But it was also dangerous, because when no one was willing to question the leader, when dissent was seen as disloyalty, when the team became an echo chamber reinforcing its own assumptions, that's when catastrophic failures happened. Carver had seen it before. Good teams that became great, then became arrogant, then became liabilities. The question was whether Alpha Platoon had already crossed that line, or if they could still be pulled back. By the time Brennan himself was called in at 1,700 hours, Carver had a clear picture. The sun was setting now, the office bathed in the golden red light of early evening. She'd turned off the overhead fluorescence, preferring the natural light. It made the space feel less like an interrogation room and more like a confessional. Brennan entered the office without knocking, his expression guarded, shoulders squared like he was walking into hostile territory. He sat without being asked, his movements sharp and controlled, and fixed it with a stare that would have made most people uncomfortable. Carver didn't flinch. "Lieutenant Commander," she began, folding her hands on the desk, "I'll be direct. Your team is loyal to you. That's admirable. The kind of loyalty you built takes years to cultivate, and it speaks to your leadership abilities. But," Brennan prompted, his voice tight, "but loyalty doesn't answer the questions I need answered." "What questions?" Brennan asked, though his tone suggested he already knew. Carver leaned forward slightly, her eyes never leaving his. "Whether you're still fit to lead." Brennan's eyes flashed, his entire body tensing. "Excuse me? You're aggressive, decisive, willing to take risks others won't. Those are qualities that make you effective. They're why you've been successful, why your men follow you, why you've climbed as far as you have. But they also make you dangerous." "Dangerous to who?" Brennan's voice was low, controlled, but there was an edge to it now. "To your men, to the mission, to the people you're supposed to protect." Brennan leaned forward, his voice tight with barely restrained anger. "Admiral, I've spent 15 years in the Navy. I've led men through hell and brought them home. I've completed missions that other teams said were impossible. If you're questioning my fitness because of Yemen—" "I'm questioning your fitness," Carver interrupted, her voice cutting through as like a blade, "because you don't seem to understand the weight of your decisions. Or worse, you understand it and you've learned to carry it too easily." Brennan stared at her, his jaw clenched so tight she could hear his teeth grinding. 12 civilians died in Yemen. Carver said quietly, each word deliberate and measured. 12. And you justified it as collateral damage, acceptable losses, unavoidable casualties of war. But those weren't numbers on a report, Brennan. They were people, fathers, mothers, children, a 70-year-old man who ran a fruit stand, a teacher, 2 teenagers who were in the wrong place at the wrong time. "I know that," Brennan said through gritted teeth. "You think I don't know that?" "Do you?" Carver asked, her gaze boring into him. "Because from where I sit, looking at your after-action reports, listening to your team, watching you operate, it looks like you've learned to live with it a little too easily, like you built walls around those memories so you can keep functioning, keep leading, keep taking risks. And I understand why. You couldn't do your job otherwise. But those walls, they're making you reckless." The silence was suffocating. The golden light from the window had deepened to crimson, casting long shadows across Carver's face, making her look older, wearier, like someone who'd seen too much and carried too many burdens. Brennan stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "Is that all, Admiral?" Carver regarded him for a long moment, her expression impossible to read. Then she nodded slowly. For now. Brennan turned and walked toward the door, his movement stiff with anger and something else. Something that might have been shame or fear or the first cracks in the armor he'd spent years building. He paused with his hand on the doorknob, his back to her. "You know what the difference is between you and me, Admiral?" he said, his voice low and rough. "I'm still out there, still in the fight. You're sitting in offices judging people for doing the job you used to do. So forgive me if I don't take lectures on the way to command from someone who decided it was easier to evaluate warriors than to be won." He walked out, the door closing hard behind him. Carver sat alone in the empty office, the red light of sunset fading to purple twilight. She didn't move for a long time, just stared at the closed folder on her desk. The one with Brennan's name on it. The one filled with commendations and incident reports and classified mission summaries. And underneath it, barely visible, the edge of another folder. An older one, worn at the corners, with a different name on the tab. Lieutenant Elizabeth Carver, Operation Enduring Freedom, Kandahar Province, October 2004. She'd been younger than Brennan when she'd led that mission, just as confident, just as certain that speed and aggression were the keys to victory. She'd been wrong. Carver reached out and touched the old folder with one finger, tracing the faded letters of her own name. Brennan's words echoed in her mind. Easier to evaluate warriors than to be won. He had no idea how wrong he was. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Because tomorrow, she would show him exactly why she understood the way to command better than anyone. Tomorrow, she would show him the ghost she carried. And maybe, just maybe, she could save him from becoming her. The final day of Admiral Carver's assessment began before dawn. The base was quiet, save for the distant hum of helicopters and the rhythmic crash of waves against the shore. Inside Building 47, Brennan stood alone in the briefing room, staring at the mission board. He hadn't slept. His mind was a storm of anger, frustration, and something he refused to name, doubt. The fluorescent lights above him buzzed softly, casting harsh shadows across the tactical maps and operational charts that covered the walls. Outside the window, the first hints of gray light were beginning to seep through the darkness, painting the Pacific horizon in muted shades of charcoal and steel. Somewhere in the distance, a training cadence echoed, young recruits running their morning PT, their synchronized footfalls a reminder that the machine never stopped, never rested, never questioned. But Brennan was questioning everything now. He replayed the last 72 hours in his mind like footage from a helmet cam. Every word Carver had spoken, every pointed question, every moment of silence that had felt like an indictment. The exercise, the debrief, the interviews, Yemen, that goddamn folder with 12 names he'd never forget, no matter how hard he tried. His reflection stared back at him from the darkened window, a man in his late 30s who looked older than his years, lines carved deep around his eyes from squinting through desert sun and scanning hostile rooftops. When had he stopped seeing himself as anything other than a weapon? When had the mission become more important than the men carrying it out? When had winning become the only metric that mattered? The door opened behind him. He didn't turn. He knew her footsteps by now, measured, deliberate, the walk of someone who'd learned long ago that every movement communicated something. Couldn't sleep either? Carver's voice was quieter than usual, almost conversational. There was a weariness in it that hadn't been there before, a weight that suggested she'd spent the night wrestling with her own demons. "Didn't see the point," Brennan replied, his voice rough from disuse. He hadn't spoken to anyone since yesterday's interview. Hayes had tried to pull him aside after dinner, but Brennan had waved him off. He needed to think, to process, to figure out how the hell he was supposed to lead a team where his own judgment was being called into question. Carver walked to the front of the room, setting her briefcase on the table with a soft thud. She looked tired, too, lines etched deeper around her eyes, her movements slower, more deliberate. Her gray jacket was slightly rumpled, and her hair, usually pulled back in a perfect bun, had a few strands loose around her face. For the first time since she'd arrived, she seemed human, vulnerable, not the untouchable Admiral who'd walked in 3 days ago and turned his world upside down, but a woman who'd spent decades carrying burdens that never got lighter. "I've completed my review," she said, pulling out a chair and sitting down heavily. She didn't open the briefcase immediately. Instead, she folded her hands on the table and looked at him with an expression that was impossible to read. Brennan finally turned to face her. His heart was pounding, though he'd never admit it, and Carver opened the briefcase, pulling out a thick document bound in a black cover. The pages were tabbed with colored markers, green, yellow, red, each one representing a different section of her assessment. My findings will be submitted to Warcom and Sockham by 1200 hours. You'll receive a formal copy by end of day. Just tell me, Brennan said, his voice tight. Are we being shut down? Carver met his eyes. The silence stretched between them like a wire pulled taut, ready to snap. No, Brennan exhaled, the tension in his shoulders easing slightly. He hadn't realized how much he'd been bracing for the opposite answer. His team, his men, they were his responsibility. The thought of them being disbanded, scattered across different units, their cohesion destroyed because of his failures. It had kept him awake all night. But Carver continued, her tone making it clear the relief was premature. There will be changes. Brennan's jaw tightened. What kind of changes? Carver opened a black-bound document, flipping to a section marked with a red tab. Mandatory oversight on all future classified operations. Enhanced after-action reviews with independent observers. Psychological evaluations for the entire platoon every 6 months. And you, she paused, her eyes locking onto his, will be required to undergo leadership counseling and tactical reassessment before you're cleared for deployment again. The words hit him like a physical blow. You're grounding me. I'm making sure you remember why you do this, Carver said, her voice firm but not unkind. Because right now I'm not convinced you do. Brennan took a step closer, his hands clenching into fists at his sides. You don't know me, Admiral. You don't know what I've sacrificed, what we've all sacrificed, to get where we are. 3 days of observation doesn't give you the right to question 15 years of service. I know exactly what you've sacrificed, Carver said sharply, standing to meet him eye to eye. I've read your file, Brennan. All of it. Not just the operational reports and the commendations. I know about the divorce, about Sarah leaving because you were gone more than you were home. I know about your daughter Emily's 8th birthday party that you missed because you were in Fallujah. I know about the 3 friends whose names are tattooed on your ribs because you can't stand the thought of forgetting them. I know you've given everything to this job. She paused, her voice softening just slightly. But that doesn't mean you're infallible. And it doesn't mean you get to stop questioning yourself. The moment you stop second-guessing your decisions is the moment you become dangerous, not to the enemy, but to people depending on you. Brennan said nothing. His throat felt tight, his chest constricted. How the hell did she know about Emily's birthday? About the tattoos? Those weren't in any official file, which meant she dug deeper, talked to people, pieced together fragments of a life he deliberately kept separate from his work. Carver reached into her briefcase and pulled out a second folder, older, worn at the edges, the kind that had been opened and closed 1,000 times. She set it on the table between them with a reverence that suggested whatever was inside mattered deeply. Open it, she said quietly. Brennan hesitated, then picked it up. The folder was heavier than he expected, the paper inside yellow with age. He opened it carefully. Inside were photographs, black and white images printed on photo paper that had started to fade at the edges. The first showed a younger woman in navy fatigues, her hair shorter, her face less lined but with the same intensity in her eyes. She was standing with a team of operators in full combat gear, somewhere that looked like Afghanistan based on a rocky terrain, and mud brick buildings in the background. It took him a moment to recognize her. Is this? Me, Carver said, sitting back down. 20 years ago, I was a lieutenant, led a SEAL delivery team during Operation Enduring Freedom. Brennan stared at the photos, flipping through them slowly. Each one showed the same woman, younger, harder, angrier, in different scenarios, training exercises, pre-mission briefings. One photo showed her in full tactical gear, face paint smeared across her cheeks, rifle in hand, eyes fixed on something beyond the camera's frame. You were a SEAL? Not officially, Carver said, a bitter edge creeping into her voice. Women weren't allowed in combat roles back then. The policy didn't change until 2016, but I was embedded with SEAL teams as a liaison officer, supposedly there to coordinate with local forces and gather intelligence. In reality, I was doing everything they did, breaching doors, clearing rooms, extracting targets. The Navy just couldn't officially acknowledge it. She pointed to one of the photos, a group shot taken somewhere in Afghanistan. 8 men and 1 woman, all in fatigues, standing in front of a Humvee. They looked young, confident, invincible. The kind of confidence that came from believing you were untouchable. That was my team, Carver continued. 8 operators. Good men. The best. We ran 23 missions together over 6 months. 0 casualties. We were so good we started to believe our own hype. Brennan looked closer. In the corner of the photo, a date was stamped in faded ink. October 2004. We were running an op in Kandahar, Carver said, her voice distant now, as if she were watching the memory play out in real time. High-value target, just like today. Taliban commander coordinating IED attacks on coalition convoys. Intelligence said he was holed up in a compound on the outskirts of the city, surrounded by loyalists. Dangerous, but nothing we hadn't handled before. She paused, her fingers tracing the edge of the photo. I made the call to move fast, just like you did in the exercise. Push through the resistance, complete the objective, get out clean. Speed was our advantage. We'd done it a dozen times before. Her voice cracked slightly, but this time was different. Brennan waited, not daring to interrupt. The intel was bad, Carver said quietly. The compound wasn't just guarded, it was fortified. Reinforced positions, overlapping field of fire, IEDs buried in the approach routes. We didn't know until we were already committed. And by then, pulling back would have meant leaving men exposed in the kill zone. She closed her eyes, her jaw tight. So I made the call, push forward, overwhelm them with aggression, get to the target before they could coordinate a response. What happened? Brennan asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Carver opened her eyes, and for a moment, Brennan saw the ghost of that younger woman staring back at him, haunted, broken, still fighting a battle that ended 2 decades ago. 3 of them didn't make it home. Brennan's throat tightened. He looked back at the photo, at the 8 faces staring out at him. Which 3, which men had trusted her, followed her orders and paid the ultimate price. Petty Officer First Class David Martinez, Carver said, as if reading his mind, 26 years old, father of twin girls who were 3 months old when he deployed. He took an RPG round to the chest during the initial assault. She pointed to another face in the photo. Chief Petty Officer James Sullivan, 32, married his high school sweetheart. He was going to retire after that deployment and become a firefighter. He bled out from shrapnel wounds before the medevac could reach us. Her finger moved to a 3rd man. Petty Officer Second Class Ramon Diaz, 24, wanted to be a teacher. He died covering our retreat, holding off enemy fighters so the rest of us could get out. Brennan felt like he'd been punched in the gut. He looked at the faces again, young, smiling, alive, and tried to imagine them cold and still, their futures erased in seconds because of a decision made under pressure. I told myself it was unavoidable, Carver said quietly, that I'd made the right call with the information I had, that speed was our advantage, and hesitation would have gotten more people killed. And maybe I was right. Maybe there was no perfect solution. But that doesn't change the fact that 3 families got folded flags because of a decision I made in 10 seconds. She looked up at Brennan, her eyes hard but glistening. So, yes, Lieutenant Commander, I know what you've sacrificed. I know what it costs to lead. I know what it's like to lie awake at night replaying every moment, wondering if you could have done something different. I know what it's like to see their faces every time you close your eyes. And I know what it's like to live with the weight of those decisions for the rest of your life. Brennan set the folder down carefully, his hands trembling slightly. Then why are you doing this? If you know what it's like, if you've been where I am, why put me through this? Why not just understand? Because I don't want you to end up like me, Carver said, her voice raw. Carrying ghosts you can't bury. Making calls you can't take back. Watching your career advance while your soul withers. I spent 10 years after Kandahar climbing the ranks, proving I was still capable, still valuable. I'm made Admiral. I got the power, the clearance, the respect. But every promotion felt like a betrayal, like I was being rewarded for surviving while they didn't. She stood, walking to the window. The sun was fully up now, casting golden light across the base. You're a good leader, Brennan. Better than I was at your age. Your men trust you, follow you, would die for you. But good isn't enough. You need to be better. You need to understand that every decision you make carries consequences that ripple far beyond the mission. Martinez's daughters grew up without a father. Sullivan's wife never remarried. Diaz's mother died of a broken heart 2 years after we brought him home in a box. She turned back to face him. Those are the costs that don't make it into the after-action reports. Those are the casualties that don't get counted in the mission success metrics. And if you don't learn to carry that weight now, if you don't learn to question yourself, to second-guess, to accept that sometimes caution is braver than aggression, you're going to end up like me, alone, haunted, wondering if any of it was worth it. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The room felt heavy, the air thick with unspoken truths and shared burdens. Finally, Brennan nodded slowly. What do you need from me? Humility, Carver said, and the willingness to admit when you're wrong. When you make a call, own it, the good and the bad. Don't hide behind operational necessity or mission parameters. Acknowledge the human cost. Let it weigh on you, because the moment it stops weighing on you is the moment you lose your humanity. Brennan swallowed hard. His voice was hoarse when he spoke. Yemen, I think about it. Every day. The 12 civilians. I see their faces in the intelligence photos. I read the witness statements. I know their names. Good, Carver said, her expression softening. That means you're still human. That means there's hope for you. She closed her briefcase with a decisive snap. Your team isn't being disbanded, but they need a leader who understands that winning isn't the only thing that matters. Lives matter. Decisions matter. Consequences matter. And sometimes the hardest thing you can do, the bravest thing you can do, is choose caution over glory, restraint over aggression, patience over speed. Brennan nodded again, this time with more certainty. He felt something shift inside him, not a breaking, but a realignment, like bones being reset after a fracture. Carver extended her hand. Don't make me come back here, Lieutenant Commander. Brennan shook her hand, her grip firm and steady. Yes, ma'am. As she turned to leave, Brennan spoke again. Admiral? She paused at the door, looking back. Thank you. Carver's expression softened into something that might have been a smile. Make me proud, Brennan. Honor them. And then she was gone. 3 months later, Brennan stood in the same briefing room, preparing for a new deployment. The mission parameters were spread across the table. Another high-value target, another classified operation, another chance to prove his worth. His team was intact, their confidence restored, but something fundamental had shifted. The exercises were slower now, more deliberate. Brennan insisted on triple-checking intelligence, running multiple contingency scenarios, consulting with his senior operators before making final calls. The debriefs were longer, more honest, not just analyzing what went right, but diving deep into what could have gone wrong, what risks they'd taken, what alternatives they dismissed too quickly. Some of the younger guys chafed at first, eager for the old pace, the old aggression. But Hayes understood. He'd been in that office with Carver too, had faced his own reckoning. And slowly, the rest of the team came around. They were still the best, still sharp, still lethal, still capable of executing missions other teams couldn't touch. But now there was something else, a thoughtfulness, a maturity, a recognition that their actions had consequences beyond the immediate tactical objective. And when Brennan made a call, he paused, just for a second, to consider the cost, not to second-guess himself into paralysis, but to acknowledge the weight of command, the responsibility he carried for every man under his charge and every life his decisions affected. On his desk, Tucked into the top drawer beneath maps and mission folders was a copy of the photo Carver had shown him. 8 faces staring out from 20 years ago, frozen a moment before everything changed. He'd asked for it before she left, and she'd given it to him without hesitation. It was a reminder, a warning, a promise. Martinez, Sullivan, Diaz. He whispered their names sometimes, late at night when the base was quiet and he was alone with his thoughts. Not as a punishment, but as a prayer, a vow that their sacrifice and the sacrifice of the 12 in Yemen would mean something, that he would learn, that he would be better. He never wanted to forget again. 3 days before the deployment, an encrypted email arrived in his inbox. No subject line, just a single sentence. Lead with wisdom, not just courage. EC. Brennan read it twice, then printed it and pinned it to the wall beside his desk, right next to the mission planning board. Elizabeth Carver had given him something more valuable than any commendation or promotion. She'd given him perspective. And in doing so, she'd save him from becoming the kind of leader he'd never wanted to be, one who won battles but lost his soul in the process. As he gathered his gear and prepared to brief his team, Brennan felt something he hadn't felt in years. Not just confidence, but clarity. He knew who he was now, what he stood for, what he was willing to risk, and what he would never compromise. He was still a warrior, still a SEAL, still a leader. But now, he was also something more. He was human, and that, he realized, was the most important qualification of all.